Here's California flooring it to the clean energy future with its transmission slipping badly. This is by Steve Miller, Real Clear Investigations on Zero Hedge. California's precariously out-of-date hybrid power grid cannot handle the state's growing amounts of solar and wind energy coming online, with system managers already forcing repeated cutbacks in renewables and a continued reliance on conventional energy to keep the grid stable, according to state data. The shortcomings for the transmission grid, which energy consultants in the bellwether state have warned about for years, raise the prospect that marquee products of the growing battery economy, such as electric vehicles, emission-free on the road, will be recharged mainly from traditional electric-generated power plants, energy and fossil fuels, some of it from out of state. Writ large, the transmission problem threatens the zero-carbon future envisioned by green advocates nationwide. We're headed towards duplicate systems whose only benefit is to permit the occasional use of clean power, said Grant Ellis, an independent electrical engineer consultant in Texas. California, with the rest of the desert Southwest, is adding solar and wind installations at a rapid pace, and the state is projected to add 4 gigawatts of utility-scale solar energy this year alone, enough to power 2.8 million homes. The question is whether it's going to be enough. So-called curtailments of renewable power have become much more frequent for the state's blackout-prone power grid because the state has not constructed enough transmission lines, transformers, poles, and other infrastructure to keep up. The amount of renewable energy curtailed in California has tripled between 2018 and 2021, according to operator statistics. On top of the conventional power often deployed in its stead, that renewable power was thus wasted since there is no place yet to store it. The state curtailed 596,175 megawatt hours April, or 596,175 million kilowatt hours, according to several calculators, with 10,715 kilowatt hours, the average annual electric consumption of a home in the United States in 2020, as calculated by the U.S. Energy Information Administration. California's curtailed wind and solar energy in April could power 55,000 homes for the year. The cutbacks mean that electric power generation falls back on nuclear and hydroelectric power, natural gas, and other more traditional sources, which provided nearly 60% of California's electric generation last year. The state also imported 30% of its electricity last year from other states. 9.5% of its coal, most of it from the Intermountain Power Project in Utah. The curtailments come at a crucial time in what the Biden administration insists is a transition from a fossil fuel-driven country to one that relies on renewable energy to save the planet from what believers warn will be a climate change disaster. Eric O'Shaughnessy, renewable energy consultant, who is working with the federally funded Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, blames the stalemate between renewable energy providers and electric system operators over who will pay for any infrastructure build-out. The system operators say, we need this huge investment and you are going to have to pay for it. And the solar developers believe everybody should pay, O'Shaughnessy said. Then politics comes into play, quote, and that project gets shelved, end quote. The government's answer is more taxpayer funding for transmission, although it will take at least 10 to 15 years to develop a new project, according to the Transmission Agency of Northern California, a group of publicly owned utilities in the state. That's been tried before. In 2011, the Obama administration created the Rapid Response Team for Transmission, which included 5 projects in the West. One is underway, while the others have been canceled or delayed. A website created to track the projects has been defunct for years. The messy process of connecting solar and wind plants to the grid is made more complicated by a maze of committees, panels, and lawyers that need to weigh in on the specifics of each project. If an energy company in California wants a transmission line, it has to go to a public utility to build it, and to the California Energy Commission and a bunch of other commissioners, said Rajat Depp of energy consultant LCG. And the cities also have to approve in some cases, so it takes all that to get a transmission line. That's a lot of hoopla you have to go through. There's less resistance to building individual solar plants in distinct locations than to transmission lines, often due to the wider geography needed for the latter, and so more solar plants get built while transmission projects languish. Still, the state aims to have a carbon-free electric grid by the year 2045, a goal set before President Biden took office and declared 2035 as a national objective. With its goal in mind, California has imposed restrictions and requirements that have adversely impacted businesses, home builders, and car makers, as well as taxpayers who pay the highest prices for fuel and the third highest rate for electricity in the United States, behind Hawaii and Alaska. Electricity prices for residential customers in California have increased 19% in the past year, compared with 7% nationally. Governor Gavin Newsom issued a 2020 executive order mandating that by the year 2035, all new vehicles sold in the state must be zero emission. If that goal is reached, it would add a crushing demand to the state's electric grid, according to some project models. With multi-billion-dollar development of massive wind farms and solar panels, the plants outpacing transmission capacity, the number of miles of new high-voltage transmission has declined over the last decade from an annual average of 2,000 miles nationally from 2012 to 16 to an average of only 700 miles from 2017 to 2021, according to the U.S. Department of Energy. A report issued by the department this year titled "Queued Up but in Need of Transmission" acknowledges the problem, saying a large amount of potential clean power capacity is struggling with the wait times and costs of connecting to the transmission grid. The Energy Department's advocacy of decarbonization includes technical reviews by representatives of big solar concerns as well as big oil corporations, most of the latter of whom also are investing in renewables. The department declined to interview requests, but Becca Jones-Albertus, director of its Solar Energy Technologies Office, wrote an email in exchange saying DOE is working to improve transmission through the Better Grid Initiative, and there are other tools available on how to alleviate the long wait times and costs associated with connecting to the grid. Jones-Albertus was referring to the Building a Better Grid program, launched in January as part of a $20 billion federal funding for upgrading and developing transmissions nationwide. She did not respond to a question regarding the nation's long-standing lack of ability to transmit solar and wind energy. Jones-Albertus also downplayed the necessity of transmission in meeting the current government green goals. Encouraged by green advocates, state and federal lawmakers have plowed money into renewable sectors with gas grants, tax breaks, loans, and other funding mechanisms, while often leaving the how-to of energy transmission to fend for itself. This year, transmission got more funding, including a $2 billion in loan for infrastructure in the Democrats' newly elected Inflation Reduction Act. Today, 61% of electricity in the U.S. comes from coal, petroleum, natural gas, and other sources. Without transmission resources, power lines that cut through swaths of land, both public and private, or the much more extensive underground cables, there's little chance of a dramatic reduction in fossil fuel electricity. The recent rush into renewables has created a situation where solar and wind developers can end up with plants that have to wait a minimum of 3 years before securing approval to sell the energy. There's a lot of renewable projects waiting on these lines requesting to connect to the system, and they are not getting connected, said Elise Kaplan, Director of Electricity at the American Council on Renewable Energy. She said, the vast majority of transmissions has been local. The U.S. has done a bad job of building these critical larger scale projects. Her group is among the growing number of new renewable energy advocates asking the feds to examine the transmission problem at the local level. Rajat Deb, the LCG consultant, voiced the frustration of green advocates. He said, I am an environmentalist in my heart, and the biggest problem we have right now is global warming. He said, I have been working on this for 40 years and nothing happens. And while they are talking about this, all these non-governmental agencies are making money, and the state and federal government is spending money. Where is all that money going to? This is on Zero Hedge by Steve Miller, Real Clear Investigations. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support, and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.